A subpoena has just been served on the Justice Department in the Fast and Furious scandal. And this subpoena goes straight to the top of the Justice Department. The chairman of the House Oversight Committee has subpoenaed documents from the Office of the Attorney General, Eric Holder. Now, we spoke with Congressman Issa just a short time ago. Chairman, nice to see you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me back on, Greta.
All right, you subpoenaed the Attorney General. Why?
No, we subpoenaed records from the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's been invited by the Judiciary Committee, and we hope that he'll come and explain the inconsistencies in his last testimony.
All right, why haven't you subpoenaed him? Is he willing to come?
We believe he will. Chairman Lamar Smith asked him to come before a joint session of our committee and his committee, and he couldn't do the dates that we'd asked, but they're negotiating other dates right now.
So there's no resistance from the Attorney General to come here to Capitol Hill to testify before your committee?
Well, I can't say there's no resistance, but we certainly know that he's going to have to clear the air by answering fully and completely what he knew, when he knew it, and why he didn't know it, if that's the case, because obviously his key lieutenants did know a great deal about Fast and Furious.
Have you asked him that before?
I asked him on May 3rd, and the answer I got was that he didn't know. I'd like an opportunity to ask him more thoroughly.
When you asked him on May 3rd, did you ask him why he didn't know?
You know, the amazing thing was he said he only knew 2 weeks before. We only had 5 minutes. Jason Chaffetz followed up a little bit. We were, quite frankly, sort of astonished that he would say he didn't know. We believed at that time that so many people knew that it was hard to believe that he wouldn't be further briefed, particularly after Brian Terry was killed. One would think that if a law enforcement officer was murdered by weapons that had been allowed to walk, that the Attorney General would be informed.
When were you first briefed about what was going on in Operation Fast and Furious?
Never.
Never?
Never. The fact is that we had a briefing on drugs. We asked about guns. They gave us information on number of guns and so on. They never mentioned Fast and Furious by name. Kenneth Melson was in that briefing. More importantly, it's very clear that that's intended to be, if you will, a way to imply that I knew. Greta, if I knew, I would have stopped it. More importantly, it wasn't my obligation to know about Fast and Furious. It was the Attorney General's obligation to make sure it didn't happen.
Do you have reason to be suspicious that the Attorney General actually knew what was going on in Fast and Furious, not simply that he knew that there was some operation out there called Fast and Furious?
We know that Lanny Breuer was operationally involved. We know that his chief of staff was operationally involved.
What does that mean, operationally involved? That they knew what was going on? They knew about what was going on?
Their direct reports were doing wiretap approvals. And as you know, wiretap requests are incredible detail in order to get that through a judge. The detail of that we have on very good authority was in fact so detailed that it would be hard not to know that guns were walking, that you knew who they were walking to, and in fact you knew the names of the people who were in the conduit line. That's what we now know. We know that Lanny Breuer knew it, or at least his key lieutenants knew it. We knew that it was under his authority that these investigations got wiretapped. So knowing that, you have to say, okay, who was it that thought this was okay? Because we can't find competent legal people who think this was okay to do. What we have is the Justice Department repeatedly denying that they ever let guns walk. Now we have proof that they did let guns walk, and they were concerned about it in their emails even after we were told that they didn't let them walk.
Right. Have you subpoenaed or asked Lanny Breuer to come here and testify?
We have not subpoenaed Lanny Breuer.
Why not?
The documents that we're looking for are the appropriate, as you know from discovery, there's a process, and the process is you ask for the hard information.
Or you could call Lanny Breuer up here and say, you know, you're the number 2 or 3, I'm not sure exactly what his rank is at the Justice Department, say, you know, what did you know, when did you know it?
In time, asking each of these individuals may be appropriate, but we want to be respectful of a legitimate process of investigation. Asking for the documents is the appropriate way to inform our investigators before we start asking individuals. This was true when we went through the various gun sales shops, and also true when we interviewed the various people local to Phoenix.
All right, now you've subpoenaed, you say documents, emails?
Correspondence related to Fast and Furious, obviously additional briefing material, memos produced about this, if you will, Fast and Furious, and quite frankly, memos that may be about cover-up.
Do you know if any memos lead to the White House at all, or any exchange of information to the White House? Do you have any reason to suspect that the White House may know more information about Fast and Furious operation?
Yes, we do.
Tell me.
We know that there was direct correspondence. We have been told that this correspondence was between two friends who just happened to include this information. We've asked for additional...
Friends in the White House?
Friends in law enforcement to a friend in the White House who was on the national security team. Now, we're not overly concerned about that, but we have to follow the facts where they lead. So we've asked for what correspondence did occur with the White House. Again, Greta, we don't think this was an operation conducted from the Oval. We do believe this was an operation thought of, probably locally, approved nationally, and allowed to continue to where Americans and Mexicans have died as a result.
You have subpoenaed these documents. Have you tried to ask for them short of subpoena? Because the subpoena is sort of, ratcheting up the tension between the Capitol Hill and the Justice Department and the White House. Have you asked for it, and has it been denied, or they're slow to give it to you?
Greta, we have been slow-rolled even when we had subpoenas, but in the beginning we asked. We asked repeatedly, we negotiated. What we found was this administration, both at Homeland Security and at Justice, marks virtually everything as law enforcement sensitive, treats it as classified material, and tries to prevent us from having it. The material we've received redacted, when compared with whistleblower documents unredacted, tell us, in fact, they are deliberately redacting beyond what we believe is reasonable.
Do you have any reason to believe that the Attorney General of the United States knew about the operation, what was going on Fast and Furious, prior to his testimony in May?
Well, he certainly knew the name Fast and Furious.
But the actual operation of what was going on, because that's the controversy.
No, Greta, the controversy is he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When he answered, I only learned about it a few weeks ago, he certainly was not answering fully that he knew about the name, knew X, Y, or Z about it, but didn't understand as fully if that's the case. The obligation of candor, the duty of candor, is something that clearly the Attorney General didn't meet in that testimony before that committee and before my questioning.
So you think he wasn't telling the truth?
I said he didn't meet a duty of candor.
What is that? But that's, I mean, if someone's not, if you're not being straight, you're not telling the truth. I mean, if you're dodging, if you're asked a question straight up.
Greta, I believe that the Attorney General was dodging at best. Lying, perhaps, but more likely dodging. He certainly knew Fast and Furious. He should have said, I have known about Fast and Furious for months or a year. I did not know certain details. And then we could have had the legitimate follow-up on those details. His duty of candor, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, should have caused him to at least give us the information that clearly I was looking for, which was, when did you know about the operation called Fast and Furious? His answer was only a few weeks ago. That did not meet the legitimate test of a top law enforcement officer who was sworn to give us the whole truth.
Can you give him a little latitude in recognition of the fact that there's a lot going on as Attorney General? For instance, we know what happened with this latest terrorism plot he's been working on for several months. I mean,
he knew enough to do a press conference. He knew enough to get a lot of PR. Look, I can't give you a pass as a very smart lawyer. I can't give the top law enforcement officer a pass on candidly speaking before Congress when asked a question, answering. Having said that, he certainly has an opportunity to answer questions fully and completely and honestly. Yes, it will be tougher than if he'd answered them correctly the first time, but he has an opportunity to say, I found out about Fast and Furious at this point. I found out about Fast and Furious more or not more when Brian Terry was murdered. And then the follow-up questions, are, quite candidly, by the Judiciary Committee, not by my committee, have to be, if you knew about Fast and Furious, or you knew about Brian Terry being killed, and he certainly did, why was it you didn't know that these weapons came from Fast and Furious, that this operation had deliberately let these guns walk? And what are you doing to the individuals who reported to you who didn't keep you fully briefed on something in which an American had been murdered? Those questions are questions for the judiciary and for the president. Do you have confidence in the top law enforcement officer if he's so detached that he says, I can't read all this stuff, and oh, by the way, I didn't know anything in detail about something in which an American Border Patrol agent had been murdered, and in fact, plenty of people south of the border had died as a result of these weapons?